Hi there and welcome. Today we're going to build a 386 SX 33MHz computer. So why the 386 SX and not a 286? Well, it offered increased CPU clocks and the ability to switch back and forth from protected mode to real mode. For this particular build, I will use an Aquarius A10001 System board. I found the manual on the retro web, though they only had a 25MHz model listed. This is the later 33MHz version and looks to be dated a year later. Some mild battery damage that repaired, and of course it's powered by the 33MHz 386 SX CPU. And here we have the board installed in the AT case. Unfortunately, I had to change the keyboard controller because the previous one was not functioning correctly at all. I also installed some heatsinks just to deal with the heat generated by the CPU and replace the oscillator that was damaged. I also basically ended up replacing every single tantalum capacitor on the 12V rail. The board originally had 1MB installed in 4-bit 256K DRAM modules, so technically I could have installed 4 1MB 30-pin SIMs, bringing up to 5MB, but I had these 60 nanoseconds 4MB SIMs on hand, so 60MB it is, the absolute maximum a 80386SX can support. So installing low latency RAM should actually have other benefits as well. It should allow me to enable zero wait state on RAM, allowing for quite a decent performance boost overall. The video will be provided by my Quantel branded NEC SV9000 video card, one of the cards that I modified to function in later XT clones by jumpering ALE to 5V. I did try using a 470 to 1 kilo ohm resistor, but a direct connection was the only option that got it to function. Here the jump is disabled and it's set for 16-bit operation. For DOS and Windows 3.1 sound, I will use an Opti C931 sound card. I'm using the default drivers that I obtained from Vogons instead of the Unisound Universal ISA plug-and-play sound card driver. For some reason it just has better DOS game support, and as an added bonus it does have a wavetable add-on header. Next, I'm installing a generic IDE controller, one by Western Digital, but mainly for floppy drive support. IDE could be useful if I want to install a CD-ROM drive, but don't think it's really feasible on a 386 SX system. Instead of a hard drive, I'm using an XTIDE REV4 with a compact flash to IDE converter. I've enabled the 5V supply jump option on this card, thus not requiring power to the CF adapter. For this build, I'll use an industrial CF card with a capacity of 1GB. General I/O is provided by this generic WinBond 8-bit ISA card. It does have 2 serial ports, game and a printer port. One of the many benefits of using the XTIDE option ROM is the fact that you can boot from any of your floppy drives. In the past, using this configuration, I would only be able to boot from the 5¼ inch drive and not the 3½ inch drive without having to swap the cable with a longer one, or use a straight cable without the twist and tinker with drive select jumpers, etc. Okay, so let's head into the BIOS quickly. Here we can configure the RAM wait states. Both read and write are currently set to 0. We can do this because of the faster 60 nanosecond RAM we installed earlier. Next, we enable shadowing on both the system and video ROMs. This feature allows the relocation of the contents of the ROM BIOS to a memory location in RAM above 640 kilobytes. This feature can increase overall system speed, as the BIOS calls are often made by applications, and if the BIOS code is now in faster RAM, the BIOS calls are accelerated. In Landmark 6, it reports the CPU type as a 386SX with a clock speed of 33.269 MHz, and indicates that this machine performs like a 42 MHz AT. A video card's a bit of a slouch, but more than adequate for period productivity applications and games. Pressing the turbo button also downclocks the CPU to 20 MHz. In Top Bench, we managed a score of 64 points. Not too bad for a 386SX system. But what holds it back could be the slower VGA card. In Checker 3, we get a rating of 19.27 times that of an IBM PC XT, 6,629 dry stones, and 121K wet stones. In NSSI, we score a total of 6,938 dry stones. With a score of 11,891 dry stones, my 386DX 40 MHz system is nearly twice as fast. It is interesting to see what an advantage a 32-bit bus and 128K level 2 cache has over its more budget counterpart. In Norton System Information 8, we managed a score of 24.8. In Superscape Benchmark or 3D Bench, we get a score of 9.9 frames a second. Could be better with a Cirrus Logic 5421 or an ET4000 video card. Enough for the benchmarks, let's see how this configuration performs when it entails gaming within DOS. Here we have Wolfenstein 3D. Seems to be running relatively smoothly, even with a potato for video card. We might be able to achieve a few more frames with a Trident 9000C, but this is totally playable. Next up is a version of Fast Doom. We've turned off certain features to increase performance. This should be quite interesting. Doom is supposed to be a fast-paced game, so on a 386 performance should be quite abysmal. I've disabled the ceiling and floor textures and set it to the lowest possible resolution mode. In Fast Doom there's 3 modes. It's high, low and potato, and potato seems to be the best option here. Next we have Duke Nukem 2, and that was released in December 1993. So this is the follow-up to the first Duke Nukem published by Apogee Software in 1991. In comparison, this features improved graphics, music and digital sound. This was barely playable on a 16MHz 802.86 and very slow on a 386SX16, but pretty smooth on this particular setup. Ultimately, your experience on these machines can vary quite substantially, since there are so many factors at play: CPU clock, RAM waste states, speed, chipset variations, which makes it very difficult in turn to build a system that would give you the experience you're looking for. Thus, basically any game that ran terribly on a basic 286 system should benefit from the faster architecture that the 386SX had to offer. However, some chip manufacturers such as Harris did produce a 286 CPU that ran at 25MHz. These were clock for clock more efficient than the 386SX. Bring into question the very reason why the latter was even a feasible upgrade option in the first place. Some later 286 system boards and chipsets even support up to 16MB of RAM, but those are not very common. I assumed it was a cheap way to gain access to the 386 instruction set without having to go to the expense of a 32-bit main board, but it was an excuse for Intel to drop second source manufacturers and charge inflated prices for, well, a rather ordinary CPU. Still, this remains a rather fun system to have in your collection, especially if you're looking for something a little more capable than your run-of-the-mill 286. Until next time, thank you for watching. Please click like or subscribe if you enjoyed this video.